Okay, this video is going to be on the Photoshop layer palette. Now I can see the layer palette right here on the right hand side. It's usually a tabbed panel. It's probably the most essential palette in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it out so it's a floating palette. And I'm going to close these extra palettes that I don't need. So what I'm going to do is just kind of expand it so I can see it really well. You have a thumbnail here. It shows you a thumbnail as to what is on this layer. You can always make this thumbnail smaller or bigger. If you go to the flyout menu here and go all the way down to panel options, and you can see where you can change it or not even have any at all. I'm going to put it back to the biggest because that's best for me. When you open up a new file or you open up an image in Photoshop, by default, you're going to get the background layer locked. When a layer is locked, you can't really do anything with it. You can't move it, you can't edit it. So we need to get rid of this lock. So I'm just going to click on the lock to get rid of it. All right, and now I can actually do something with this layer if I want to. I could go in, go to my move tool, and I could move it around if I wanted to because it's unlocked. To turn the visibility on and off of a layer, all you need to do is click on these eyeballs and it turns the visibility off. It's not deleting the layer, but rather just changing the visibility preferences. The next thing I'm going to do is show you that I've got two files open here. When you open up multiple files in Photoshop, they actually tab at the top here so you can click between them. And I'm going to go to this particular file. And as you can see, I've got more layers in this file. I've got a text layer, and I can tell it's a text layer by the T here. I just used my paintbrush here and I drew on my on this particular layer, and then I added a rectangle. Again, you can turn the visibility off these layers so you don't see them. Okay, this particular file, I still have the background line locked, so I'm going to go ahead and click it to get that gone. I could turn them all on or turn them off. You can also change the position of the layers. You can see there's a stacking order, meaning this blue rectangle is on top of my paintbrush strokes, okay? And the paintbrush strokes is on top of the type layer. You can change these layers around by selecting the layer and dragging it up. When you go through these layers, when you move them around, you can actually see a little blue line. That's a visual indicator that you can move something. Now, I can't see the type layer yet because this blue rectangle is still on the top, so I'm going to drag it all the way to the top. I get that little fist icon and I can let go. You can add new layers in Photoshop by going to the little icon next to the trash can, and you can create a new layer. Now, you want all your elements to live on individual layers because you can't edit something in Photoshop unless you're on the layer that it lives on. Meaning, if I wanted to edit this type, I actually need to be on this type layer and then go to the type tool, and then I can select that type and I can modify it. If I want to move something around in a layer, again, I need to be on that layer. And I'll be on my type layer, and I can go to my move tool and I can move these elements around. If you no longer want a layer, you can select that layer and you can hit the trash can at the bottom of the palette. So again, you need to select the layer that you don't want and you can click on the trash can. Photoshop will give you this message box. It wants to know if you really want to delete it or not, and I'm just going to say okay. All right, I'm going to go back to this layer again, and I'm going to show you basically what I did here to create this particular multi-layer file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and add a new layer. Now the first thing I did was I just went to the type layer. Okay, at the top here you can select your typeface, the size, and you can select the color. And I'm just going to leave them at my defaults for now, and I'm just going to go in and just type out my name. Okay, and as you can see, the stacking order is taking place. Now the type sits on top of this cat image. If I add a new layer, and I'm going to go to my paintbrush this time, at the top here I can select a paintbrush size. If I move in the document, I can actually see the size of the paintbrush. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to come down here in the color chip and I'm going to pick maybe purple and say, okay, now I've got purple, I've got the paintbrush, I've selected a size, and I can just go in here and I can swipe with my paintbrush. Okay, let me add another layer. So I'm going to go down to the layer palette, add another layer, and this time I'm going to fill it with a color. So let me go to the color chip here at the bottom of the toolbar and I'll pick maybe an orange and say okay. To fill a layer, there are two ways you can go about doing it. You can go edit, fill, and the choices you have are the foreground layer, which is this chip right here, or you can choose black, 50% gray, or white, or you could choose the background layer, which I don't want. I'm just going to say okay to foreground, and it fills it with the color. Now let me go ahead and delete that and show you another way. Let me add that layer again. Another way to fill a layer would be to go to your paint bucket. Now the paint bucket normally lives under the gradient tool. Now Photoshop will give you on the top of the toolbar the last tool that you've selected. So I must have selected paintbrush, the paint bucket last because I'm seeing the paint bucket. But if you hold on all these tools, you can see all of them have a sub-menu. Now again, depending on which tool that you use last, it's going to end up in the forefront. So I'm going to go to the paint bucket tool, and it gives you an icon that looks like a paint bucket, and you can spill that color in. Now with the layer palette, looking at the top here, some of these we're not going to cover just yet, but one I do want to cover is opacity. I can change the opacity of a layer, moving the slider around. Again, I can change the order of these layers by clicking on a layer and holding my mouse down and pulling up. I can delete a layer by selecting the layer and hitting the trash can and saying yes. That's really the basics of the layer palette. Again, you want all your elements to live on a separate layer because that way you can go edit. Meaning I need to be on my type layer if I actually want to move this type around. If I want to edit the type and go to the tool here, I'm going to select it and I can increase the point size. But I think the biggest mistake students have is they're not on the right layer. Also, I'm going to recommend that you get rid of auto select here. It is a default. It's going to be harder for you to select things that are on layers if you've got auto select checked on. Okay? Again, that's my recommendation if you're having problems selecting things on layers.